You write one more note in that little book of yours, and I'll make sure you never work in any courthouse in this state again." The bailiff's breath was hot against the back of her neck. His shadow swallowed hers against the filing cabinet. Imani Okafor did not turn around, did not flinch, did not close the leather notebook in her hands. She had been waiting 11 months for someone to threaten her directly. 11 months of watching, documenting, building a case that would bring this entire courthouse down. And Grady Nichols had just handed her exactly what she needed. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the quiet contract interpreter taking notes in courtroom 3B was a licensed attorney with the Georgia State Bar, that every word she had written for the past 11 months was protected under whistleblower statutes, that the man who had just threatened her career had threatened the wrong woman. The fluorescent light above them flickered once, twice. "I heard you," Imani said quietly. She turned the page, kept writing. Grady's hand slammed down on the filing cabinet beside her head. The metal rang like a gunshot. "You think you're smart." His voice dropped to a growl. "You think taking notes protects you. But let me tell you something about how things work around here. Judge Whitmore has been running this courthouse for 19 years. Oscar Fuentes has been his interpreter for 12. And you," he leaned closer, "you're just another contract worker who doesn't know when to stop asking questions." The door to the file room opened. Light spilled in from the hallway. "Grady." Bethany Crane's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "The judge needs you in courtroom 2A. The bailiff straightened slowly, adjusting his belt like he had all the time in the world. He looked down at Imani one more time. "We're not done." Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the linoleum floor. Bethany remained in the doorway, her silhouette sharp against the fluorescent glare. "Ms. Okafor?" Her tone carried no warmth. "Perhaps you should focus less on documentation and more on your actual job. Your probation review is in 3 weeks." The door closed with a soft click. Imani stood alone in the file room, surrounded by decades of case records. Somewhere in these cabinets was the file that had brought her here. Case number 2020 CR 1138. Her cousin Darnell's conviction. The translation that had sent an innocent man to prison for 8 years. She looked down at her notebook. Page 47. 11 months of evidence. 3 more weeks. That's all she needed. But as she slipped the notebook into her bag and headed for the door, she didn't know that they had already decided she wouldn't last that long. If you've ever felt like the system was rigged against you, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will show you exactly how deep the corruption goes. Chapter 2. 11 months earlier, the assignment had arrived in a manila folder marked Confidential. The conference room on the 4th floor of the Georgia Attorney General's office smelled like stale coffee and ambition. Calvin Rhodes sat across from Imani, his tie loosened, his eyes carrying the weight of too many cases and not enough convictions. Mercer County Superior Court. He slid a photograph across the table. An older white man in judicial robes, silver hair swept back, smile practiced for campaign photographs. Judge Harrison Whitmore, 19 years on the bench, pillar of the community, Rotary Club president, deacon at First Baptist. Imani studied the photograph. The smile didn't reach the eyes. And his conviction rate for Hispanic defendants is 32% higher than the state average. Calvin pulled out another photograph. A younger man, mid-40s, dark hair graying at the temples. Oscar Fuentes, court interpreter, 12 years, handles 89% of all Spanish-language cases in the county. 89%. Imani's voice was flat. 1 interpreter for an entire county. Gets better. Legal aid organizations have filed 17 complaints over the past 5 years. Allegations of mistranslation. Defendants claiming their testimony was changed. Families saying their loved ones were convicted based on words they never said. And the complaints? Dismissed, every single one. Internal review found no wrongdoing. Calvin leaned back in his chair. The reviews were conducted by the court administrator, Bethany Crane, who reports directly to Judge Whitmore. The pattern was clear. Translation errors that always favored conviction. A single interpreter controlling the narrative. A judge who benefited from the results. An administrator who buried the complaints. "What do you need from me?" Calvin slid another document across the table. Employment application. Contract interpreter position. Mercer County Superior Court. 11 months deep cover. You're a freelance interpreter, nothing more. No law degree on your resume. No bar card in your wallet. Just languages and patience. Imani picked up the application. Her real credentials, Columbia Law, 3 years at a civil rights firm in Atlanta, fluent Spanish from a semester abroad in Bogota that had turned into 3 years of human rights work, all of it would disappear. She would become someone smaller, someone invisible. Why me? Calvin's expression shifted. Something like sympathy crossed his face before he buried it. Because your cousin is serving 8 years in Georgia State Prison, convicted of assault in Mercer County in 2020, interpreter of record, Oscar Fuentes. He paused. Darnell Okafor doesn't speak Spanish, does he? The room went cold. No. Imani's voice was barely a whisper. He doesn't. Then someone decided he needed a translator anyway, and that translator turned his statement of innocence into a confession. The photograph of Judge Whitmore stared up at her from the table. 19 years, pillar of the community. When do I start? Her first day at Mercer County Courthouse, Imani arrived at 7:45 in the morning. The building was a relic from the 1950s, red brick, narrow hallways, marble floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. The security checkpoint was manned by a bailiff whose uniform strained across his shoulders, whose eyes tracked her from the moment she walked through the door. Grady Nichols. She had memorized his file. Former corrections officer. 3 complaints of excessive force, all dismissed. Known associates included 2 officers currently under federal investigation for civil rights violations. He examined her temporary badge like it was a forgery. New face. His voice carried no curiosity, only assessment. Contract interpreter? Yes, sir. First day. He held the badge a moment longer than necessary before handing it back. They come and go. Most don't last past probation. The words hung in the air as she passed through the metal detector. A warning disguised as observation. The court administrator's office was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a hallway lined with portraits of former judges. All white, all male, all wearing the same practiced smile that Judge Whitmore had perfected. Bethany Crane's door was open. The woman inside sat behind a mahogany desk, photographs of her with various local politicians arranged on the wall behind her. Her hair was silver blonde, her makeup precise, her suit the color of a winter sky. Miss Okafor. Bethany did not stand, did not extend her hand. Sit. Imani sat. Your assignment is overflow cases. Mr. Fuentes handles priority matters. You'll assist when volume requires. Bethany slid a stack of paperwork across the desk. Sign these. Non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality protocols, standard procedure. Imani read each page before signing, a habit from law school that she forced herself to slow down, make look like inexperience rather than expertise. You take a long time, Bethany observed. I like to understand what I'm agreeing to. Something flickered in Bethany's eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or the beginning of suspicion. Oscar will show you our system. Follow his lead. Don't improvise. Don't innovate. The court runs on consistency. Understood. Bethany's gaze lingered on Imani's notebook, leather-bound, corners already softening from use. What's that for? Notes, for accuracy. I was taught to document everything. Oscar can show you our documentation system. We don't need freelance methods. The dismissal was clear. Imani gathered her paperwork and left, the weight of Bethany's attention pressing against her back until the door closed behind her. Chapter The break room on the first floor had a coffee maker that produced something closer to motor oil than caffeine, a refrigerator covered in passive-aggressive notes about food theft, and a lunch table that divided itself along invisible lines. Oscar Fuentes held court at the largest table, surrounded by clerks and administrative staff who laughed at his jokes and deferred to his opinions. 58 years old, born in Mexico, naturalized citizen at 22, 12 years as the county's primary Spanish interpreter, respected, trusted, untouchable, and responsible, according to Imani's preliminary research, for the wrongful conviction of at least 47 defendants. She took her lunch to a corner table, alone. "You're the new one," a voice from behind her. She turned to find Oscar standing there, coffee cup in hand, smile firmly in place. "Imani, yes?" "Yes." He sat across from her without invitation. "Bethany tells me you take a lot of notes." "Habit. Habits can be good, or they can be—" He paused, searching for the word. "Problematic." Imani held his gaze. "I find that documentation prevents misunderstandings." "In theory, yes, but in practice?" Oscar spread his hands. "The court has systems, protocols, ways of doing things that have worked for many years. A new interpreter who documents too much, who questions too much." He shrugged. "It creates friction. Friction slows the docket, and Judge Whitmore values efficiency." "I'll keep that in mind." Oscar's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "I'm sure you will." He left to rejoin his table. The laughter resumed. No one looked at Imani. She finished her lunch in silence, then returned to her assigned courtroom. But before she entered, she paused at a water fountain, pulled out her phone, and typed a quick note. Day 1. Oscar Fuentes warned against documentation. Bethany Crane hostile. Grady Nichols conducting security. Excessive attention. Proceeding as planned. She hit send. The message encrypted itself and vanished into the servers of the Georgia Attorney General's office. 11 months. She could do this. The first week passed in a blur of small indignities. Monday. Oscar corrected her translation of a witness statement, changing "I didn't see anything" to "I cannot confirm what I saw." Subtle, deniable. But the shift in meaning was significant enough to undermine the witness's credibility. Tuesday. Bethany reassigned Imani from a felony assault case to a routine traffic violation, citing experience levels. The felony case went to Oscar. The defendant was convicted. Wednesday. Grady followed her to the parking lot after work. "Just walking in the same direction," he said, "just making sure the lot was safe." Thursday. Someone moved her files from her assigned desk to a storage closet. "Clerical error," Bethany explained. Friday. The coffee maker was empty when she arrived, full when Oscar's group came in 5 minutes later. Small things. Individually meaningless. Collectively, a message. You don't belong here. Imani documented everything. She developed a routine designed to minimize conflict and maximize observation. Arrive early, before the social dynamics of the break room could exclude her. Take lunch in her car, where she could transcribe her notes without surveillance. Leave exactly on time, not early enough to suggest disengagement, not late enough to attract attention. At night, in her rented apartment on the outskirts of town, she compiled her observations into encrypted reports. The AG's office had provided secure communication channels. Calvin checked in once a week, always from a burner phone, always with the same question. Anything actionable yet? Not yet, not quite. But the patterns were emerging. Week 2. The Ramirez case. Eduardo Ramirez, 23 years old, charged with possession with intent to distribute. The quantity involved was small, barely above the threshold for personal use, but the prosecutor was pushing for felony charges. The public defender was overworked, handling 6 cases that day, barely glancing at the file before calling his client's name. Oscar Fuentes served as interpreter. Imani sat in the gallery, notebook open, pen moving in the shorthand system she had learned in law school. To anyone watching, it looked like the excessive note-taking of an anxious newcomer. In reality, she was creating a verbatim record of everything said, in English and in Spanish. The defendant took the stand. Young, scared. His English was limited but functional, better than many defendants who were assigned interpreters. He could have testified in English with minimal assistance. Instead, Oscar translated. "Mr. Ramirez," the prosecutor began, "did you know the substance in your possession was illegal?" The defendant's response, in Spanish, "No sabía exactamente qué era. Mi amigo me lo dio para guardar." I didn't know exactly what it was. My friend gave it to me to hold. Oscar's translation. He says he knew it was illegal, but his friend asked him to hold it anyway. Imani's pen stopped moving. She looked up. The defendant's face was confused. He understood enough English to know something was wrong, but not enough to articulate it. The public defender, drowning in paperwork, didn't catch the discrepancy. The prosecutor smiled. "So you knowingly possessed an illegal substance?" Oscar translated the question. The defendant began to protest in Spanish. "No, eso no es lo que dije. No, that's not what I said." Oscar cut him off, turning to the court. "He confirms his previous statement." The judge nodded. The defense offered no objection. The trial continued. Imani forced herself to keep writing, forced herself to stay silent. Intervening now would blow her cover and save one defendant while allowing the system to destroy hundreds more. The math was brutal, but clear. Eduardo Ramirez was convicted. 3 years. That night, Imani sat in her apartment and stared at her notes until the words blurred. One case, one defendant, one lie that would cost a young man 3 years of his life. She thought about Darnell. 4 years into an 8-year sentence, maintaining his innocence in every letter, every phone call, every appeal that went nowhere. "I told them I wasn't there. I said it in English, Imani. But they said I needed a translator, and the translator said what they wanted him to say." She picked up her phone, dialed a number she knew by heart. "Mercer County Correctional Facility. How may I direct your call?" "Inmate visitation scheduling, Darnell Okafor." Static on the line. Then, "Visiting hours are Saturday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Would you like to schedule?" "Yes." She would go. She would look her cousin in the eye. She would tell him she was close, so close, to proving what had been done to him. And she would not stop until every single person responsible was held accountable. If this story is making your blood boil, you're not alone. Drop a comment below telling me what you think should happen to these corrupt officials, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. Week 3. The Vega case began. Marisol Vega was 34 years old, born in Guatemala. Came to the United States at 19, worked as a housekeeper for 15 years, raised a daughter alone after her husband's deportation. Never missed a rent payment. Never caused trouble. Until the night her landlord tried to collect payment in a different form. According to the police report, Marisol had stabbed her landlord with a kitchen knife, causing injuries that required 12 stitches. According to Marisol, she had defended herself when he pinned her against the wall and tried to tear off her clothes. The charge: assault with a deadly weapon. If convicted, she faced up to 20 years. Oscar Fuentes was assigned as interpreter. Imani was assigned to observe. A training exercise, Bethany called it. Watch how the experienced interpreter handles high-stakes cases. The preliminary hearing took place on a Tuesday morning. Courtroom 3B. Judge Harrison Whitmore presiding. Imani took her usual seat in the gallery. Notebook open. Pen ready. Marisol sat at the defense table, looking smaller than her 5 feet 2 inches, her court-appointed attorney barely glancing at her as he shuffled through papers. The prosecutor called his first witness, the landlord, Gerald Tate, white, 53, owner of 4 rental properties in the county's predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. "Mr. Tate," the prosecutor began, "can you describe what happened on the night of March 15th? Gerald Tate touched the bandage on his arm, theatrical, practiced. "I went to collect rent. She was behind 2 months. I knocked. She let me in. And then, without any warning, she just attacked me." "Attacked you how?" "Grabbed a knife from the kitchen, came at me. I barely got my arm up in time." "And what were you doing when she attacked you?" "Nothing. Standing there, trying to work out a payment plan." Lies. Imani could see it in the way his eyes slid away from the defense table, the way his hands stayed in his lap to hide their trembling. But lies told in English, under oath, with no physical evidence to contradict them. The prosecutor finished his examination. The defense cross-examination was perfunctory. The attorney asked 3 questions, accepted evasive answers, and sat down. Then it was Marisol's turn to testify. Oscar approached the witness stand, taking his position beside her. His smile was reassuring, the kindly interpreter here to help the frightened immigrant navigate the American legal system. "Mrs. Vega," the prosecutor began, "in your own words, what happened on the night of March 15th? Marisol spoke in Spanish, her voice shaking but clear. "Él vino a mi apartamento. Me dijo que si no le pagaba de otra manera me iba a echar. Me empujó contra la pared. Trató de... She stopped, tears streaming down her face. "Me defendí. Solo me defendí. He came to my apartment. He told me if I didn't pay him another way, he was going to throw me out. He pushed me against the wall. He tried to... I defended myself. I only defended myself." Imani's pen moved faster, capturing every word in her shorthand. Oscar cleared his throat, turned to face the judge. "The defendant states that she attacked Mr. Tate when he came to collect rent because she was angry about being behind on payments." The words hit Imani like a physical blow. Marisol's head snapped toward Oscar, confusion and horror warring on her face. "No, eso no es... No, that's not..." Oscar held up a hand, silencing her. "She says she was very angry. She couldn't control herself." "Objection." The defense attorney finally looked up from his papers. "That's not what she said." Judge Whitmore's gavel came down. "Overruled. The court trusts its certified interpreter." Marisol began speaking rapidly in Spanish, trying to explain, trying to correct. Oscar translated none of it. "The defendant is becoming agitated," he said calmly. "Perhaps a brief recess?" Judge Whitmore nodded. 10-minute recess. The bailiff, Grady Nichols, approached Marisol, hand on his belt. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." "But he's lying." Marisol switched to broken English, desperate. "He's lying about what I said." Grady's hand closed on her arm. Not gently. "I said calm down." He steered her toward a side door, her protests echoing off the marble walls until they faded into silence. Imani sat frozen in the gallery. Her notebook contained the truth. Every word Marisol had actually said. But revealing it now would end everything. The investigation, the chance to expose the full scope of the corruption, the opportunity to free Darnell and dozens of others. One woman's future weighed against many. The math was brutal, and Imani hated herself for doing it. When the recess ended, Marisol returned to the courtroom, subdued, defeated, the fight gone from her eyes. Oscar finished his translation. The prosecutor rested. The defense offered no closing argument. Judge Whitmore set a trial date for 6 weeks out. Marisol Vega was led away in handcuffs, still not fully understanding how her words had been transformed into her conviction. That afternoon, Imani found Oscar in the hallway outside courtroom 3B. "Mr. Fuentes," She kept her voice neutral. I noticed you taking some liberties with the translation. Oscar's smile didn't waver. Liberties? The defendant said she defended herself. You translated it as attacked. The smile hardened. Just slightly. Just enough. Ms. Okafor. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Court interpretation is not about word-for-word translation. It's about conveying meaning, intent, context. A frightened immigrant woman doesn't always know how to express herself in a way the court can understand. I help bridge that gap. By changing her testimony? By clarifying it. His eyes locked onto hers. You've been here 3 weeks. I've been doing this for 12 years. Perhaps you should spend less time taking notes and more time learning how things actually work. He started to walk away, then paused. Oh, and Ms. Okafor? Bethany mentioned your probation review is coming up. I'd hate to have to report that you're struggling to adapt to our methods. He glanced at the notebook in her hands. Excessive documentation can be a sign of insecurity, professional insecurity, the kind that makes employers question whether an interpreter can be trusted to work independently. The threat was clear. Play along or be eliminated. I appreciate the advice, Imani said quietly. Oscar nodded once, then disappeared down the hallway. Imani stayed where she was, back against the wall, heart pounding. 3 more weeks until probation review. 6 weeks until Marisol Vega's trial. She needed more evidence, faster. Week 4. The research deepened. Every night after work, Imani accessed public court records from her apartment. No hacking, no unauthorized access. Just the database available to any citizen willing to navigate its archaic interface. The numbers told a story. Between 2021 and 2024, Oscar Fuentes served as interpreter in 47 cases involving Hispanic defendants charged with violent crimes. Conviction rate, 94%. State average for comparable charges, 62%. She cross-referenced the cases. Common patterns emerged. Defendants who testified in their own defense were most likely to be convicted. Their testimony was filtered through Oscar, transformed, weaponized against them. Defendants who remained silent fared slightly better, but without testimony to counter prosecution narratives, they still convicted at rates far above average. Defendants who requested different interpreters were denied. Mr. Fuentes is the court's certified interpreter, case records noted again and again. Alternative arrangements are not available. She dug deeper. Financial records were harder to access, but property transfers were public. Judge Harrison Whitmore owned 3 properties in Mercer County. 2 were rental units. One was a vacation home purchased in 2019 for $340,000. Cash transaction, no mortgage. The year before, the Mercer County Community Foundation, a charitable organization where Whitmore served as board chair, had received $47,000 in donations from a single source. Preston Lockwood, escrow, local defense attorney. Preston Lockwood represented clients who, despite serious charges, routinely received reduced sentences or dismissals in Judge Whitmore's courtroom. The picture was becoming clearer. But Imani needed more than patterns. She needed testimony, documents, the kind of evidence that would hold up in a federal courtroom. She needed someone on the inside willing to talk. Week 5. The isolation deepened. The microaggressions had become routine. Imani no longer expected invitations to lunch, no longer looked for friendly faces in the hallway. She had become a ghost in the courthouse, present but invisible, tolerated but not accepted. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon, from Oscar Fuentes, to Imani Okafor, CC Bethany Crane, subject Translation Review, Case 491. Ms. Okafor, please see attached corrections to your interpretation in Case 491, Traffic Violation, Minor. Your use of amenaza versus attack in line 47 requires revision. Additionally, your transcript shows several instances of unnecessary verbatim recording that deviate from court-approved summarization protocols. Accuracy is paramount. Please implement these corrections and submit revised documentation by end of business tomorrow. Regards, Oscar Fuentes. Senior Court Interpreter Imani read the email 3 times. There was nothing wrong with her translation. Amenaza, threat, was the word the defendant had used. Ataque, attack, was what Oscar wanted her to write instead. He was testing her, seeing if she would comply, documenting her errors to build a case for termination. She saved the email, forwarded a copy to her encrypted AG account, then opened a reply. Mr. Fuentes, thank you for your feedback. I will review the attached corrections. Best, Imani Okafor. No compliance, no defiance, just acknowledgement. Let him wonder. The parking lot incident happened on Friday evening. Imani had stayed late, photocopying documents in the file room, legally accessible records from cases where Oscar had served as interpreter. Public information, technically, but information that Bethany would not want her to have. At 6:15, she packed her bag and headed for the exit. The hallway was empty. The building echoed with the silence of a workday ended. She pushed through the side door into the parking lot. Grady Nichols was standing next to her car. Ms. Okafor? His voice carried across the empty concrete. Leaving late. Finishing some work. Must be important work. He ran a hand along the hood of her Toyota. Nice car, 2019? Is there a problem? No problem. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. Just being friendly. You know, there have been break-ins around here lately. Cars vandalized, windows smashed. Happens a lot to people who park in this lot after hours. Imani stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to run if needed. I appreciate the warning. Do you? Grady took a step toward her. Because I'm not sure you understand how things work around here. This is a small county, small courthouse. People talk. And lately, people have been talking about you. What are they saying? That you ask too many questions, that you take too many notes, that you don't seem to understand that the way things have always been done is the way things should be done. Another step closer. That you might need someone to explain things to you more directly. Imani held her ground. Are you threatening me, Mr. Nichols? Threatening? He laughed. I'm trying to help you, give you some friendly advice. Keep your head down, do your job, stop making waves. His smile vanished. Because if you don't, I can promise you, the break-ins around here, they won't be random anymore. He walked away, disappearing into the shadows at the edge of the parking lot. Imani stood alone beside her car, heart pounding, hands steady. She pulled out her phone, typed a quick message. Physical threat received from Grady Nichols, 6:17 p.m. Witness none, recording none. None. Proceeding with caution. Send. Then she got in her car, locked the doors, and drove home through the darkening Georgia evening. Week 6. The noose tightened. Monday morning, Bethany called Imani into her office. Grady stood by the door, arms crossed, blocking the exit. Ms. Okafor, Bethany's voice was ice. We need to discuss your performance. Imani sat. Of course. Oscar has filed a formal complaint. Bethany slid a document across the desk. Pattern of insubordination, deviation from established protocols, creating a hostile work environment through excessive scrutiny of senior staff. Imani scanned the document. Every correction Oscar had sent was listed as an example of her incompetence. Her documentation habits were characterized as obsessive and disruptive. Her questions about translation methods were labeled insubordination. I'd like a copy of this complaint, she said calmly, and documentation of the specific incidents cited. Bethany's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Georgia Code Section 45-1-4 requires written documentation of cause for disciplinary action involving state-funded positions. Imani kept her voice steady, professional. "I'm requesting that documentation for my records." Silence. Grady shifted his weight, leather belt creaking. Bethany's pen tapped against the desk. Once, twice, 3 times. "You seem very familiar with employment law for a contract interpreter." "I read the handbook," Imani said. "Thoroughly." The lie was thin. She knew it. Bethany knew it. But proving otherwise would require an investigation that no one in this building wanted to initiate. "HR will provide what's required." Bethany's tone could have frozen water. "In the meantime, consider yourself on notice. Your probation review has been moved up. Friday, 10 a.m., in this office." "Understood." Imani stood, took the complaint, and walked toward the door. Grady didn't move. "Mr. Nichols." He stared down at her for a long moment, then stepped aside, just enough for her to squeeze past. "Friday," he said as she walked away. "Looking forward to it." The file room was technically off limits after hours, but Imani's badge still worked. Wednesday night, 9:30 p.m. The courthouse was empty, the hallways lit only by emergency exit signs casting red shadows on the marble floors. She had 3 days until the review. 3 days to find the evidence that would make everything else irrelevant. The filing cabinets were organized by year, then by case number. She moved quickly, efficiently, pulling files she had already identified through public records. Case 20-20, CR 1138. State of Georgia versus Darnell Okafor. The folder was thin, too thin. Where there should have been transcript pages, motion records, evidence logs, there were only empty spaces and a single cover sheet. Interpreter, Oscar Fuentes. Verdict, guilty sentence, 8 years. Notes. Defendant required Spanish interpreter per court determination. Court determination, not defendant request. Not language assessment. Someone had decided Darnell needed an interpreter. Darnell, who had been raised in Atlanta, who had never spoken Spanish in his life. Imani photographed the cover sheet, then systematically worked through the surrounding files, looking for cross-references, related documents, anything that could explain how a monolingual English speaker had been assigned a Spanish interpreter. At 10:15, she found it. Case 2020, CR 1137, filed the day before Darnell's case. Defendant, Maria Gonzalez, charged with shoplifting. Interpreter, Oscar Fuentes. The case numbers were sequential. Standard procedure was to assign interpreters based on case order, whoever was available when the case was filed, but Darnell's case had been filed in the morning. Maria's had been filed in the afternoon. The timestamps were on the cover sheets. Someone had changed the order, backdated Maria's filing to ensure Oscar would be unavailable for her minor case and available for Darnell's felony assault charge. Someone had specifically arranged for Oscar to translate for a defendant who didn't speak the language. Imani photographed everything, then carefully replaced the files exactly as she had found them. She was almost to the door when the lights came on. Grady Nichols stood in the doorway, hand on the light switch, smile spreading across his face. "Ms. Okafor." He stepped into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. "Working late again?" "Finishing some documentation." "In the file room, after hours, 3 days before your review." He shook his head slowly. "That doesn't look good." "I have badge access. I'm not doing anything unauthorized." "Maybe, maybe not." He walked toward her, each step deliberate. "But here's the thing. I've been doing this job a long time, and I know how to read situations. I know when someone's just doing their job." He stopped an arm's length away. "And when someone's looking for trouble." Imani didn't back away. "I'm looking for the truth." "The truth," Grady laughed. "Let me tell you something about the truth, Ms. Okafor. The truth is whatever Judge Whitmore says it is. The truth is whatever Oscar translates it to be. The truth is whatever keeps this courthouse running smooth, and the people in charge staying in charge." He leaned closer. close enough that she could smell coffee and something sour on his breath. And people who go looking for a different kind of truth? They don't last long around here. His hand shot out, grabbing her bag strap before she could react. What's in here? More notes? More questions? He yanked the bag off her shoulder, sent it crashing to the floor. Files scattered across the linoleum. Her notebook skidded under a cabinet. That's my personal property. And this is my courthouse. Grady kicked through the papers, scanning for anything incriminating. You think I don't know what you're doing? You think I'm stupid? I think you're making a mistake. The only mistake here, he grabbed her arm, fingers digging into muscle, is you thinking you can walk in here and play games with people who've been running this county since before you were born. Imani's training kicked in. Not physical training, legal training. Documentation, witnesses, evidence. Let go of my arm. Or what? Or I file assault charges, battery, false imprisonment. You're a law enforcement officer using physical force against a civilian who poses no threat. That's a federal civil rights violation under Title 18, Section 242. Grady's grip loosened, just slightly. The legal citation had landed, not because he understood it, but because the specificity of it suggested consequences he hadn't anticipated. You've got a smart mouth. I've got a good memory. Imani pulled her arm free, stepped back. And I've got documentation of this encounter. The time, the date, your exact words. If anything happens to me, anything at all, that documentation goes straight to the AG's office. A bluff. Mostly. She had no recording, no witness. But Grady didn't know that. He stared at her for a long moment, then stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. Fine. Go home. Write your notes. Play your little games. His smile returned, colder than before. But remember what I said. Friday, 10 a.m. And after that? He shrugged. Well, we'll see how smart that mouth is when you're unemployed and unhirable in every courthouse in Georgia. He left. The door swung shut behind him. Imani gathered her files with trembling hands, retrieved her notebook from under the cabinet, checked that her phone was still in her pocket, still recording the way it had been since she walked into the file room. The recording quality would be poor. His voice might be too distant. The legal value was questionable, but it was something. Another piece of evidence. Another thread in the web she was weaving. 3 more days. Thursday night. Imani made a call she had been avoiding. Ada Simmons had been the court reporter for Mercer County Superior Court for 30 years before her retirement in 2020. She had witnessed thousands of cases, typed millions of words, recorded the official proceedings of every trial in the county. And according to rumors Imani had carefully cultivated from courthouse gossip, she had kept copies. The address was a small house on the outskirts of town, white paint peeling, garden overgrown. The kind of place where someone went to disappear from the world they'd left behind. Imani knocked. The woman who opened the door was 71 years old, gray-haired, sharp-eyed. She looked at Imani for a long moment before speaking. You're the interpreter they're trying to push out. Yes, ma'am. Thought so. Ada stepped back, holding the door open. Come in. I've been waiting for someone like you. The living room was cluttered with boxes, file boxes, dozens of them, stacked along the walls, filling corners, spilling onto furniture. What is all this? 30 years of transcripts. Ada lowered herself into an armchair, gesturing for Imani to sit. Every case I recorded, I kept copies. Personal backup. Digital system came in 2015, but I never trusted it. Paper doesn't glitch. Paper doesn't get accidentally deleted. Imani's heart began to pound. You have paper copies of court transcripts? Every single one. Ada's eyes were steady, including cases where the official record doesn't match what I actually recorded. The room went quiet. Like what cases? Like Darnell Okafor. Ada stood, moved to a stack of boxes near the window. Case number 2020-CR-1138. I remember that one. Young black man, barely 20 years old, charged with assault, claimed he wasn't there, claimed he didn't speak Spanish. She pulled out a folder, carried it back to Imani. But Oscar Fuentes was assigned as his interpreter anyway. And when Oscar translated his testimony, Ada shook her head. I flagged it, submitted a discrepancy report, waited for someone to follow up. And? Nothing. A month later, they offered me early retirement. Good package. Very good package. Too good to question. Imani opened the folder. Inside, a transcript. Court reporter format, time-stamped, every word captured in shorthand and then expanded. Defendant's statement, verbatim. I wasn't there. I was at work. You can check the time clock. Interpreter Oscar Fuentes, translation to court. The defendant states he was present and struck the victim. Court reporter note. Discrepancy observed. Flagged for review. Review status. Blank. He said he wasn't there. Imani's voice was barely a whisper, and Oscar said he confessed. That's not the worst part. Ada pulled another document from the folder. Look at this. Language assessment form. Supposed to be filled out before every interpreter assignment. Determines whether defendant needs translation services. Imani scanned the form. Name, Darnell Okafor. Primary language, Spanish. Assessment conducted by Bethany Crane. Darnell doesn't speak Spanish, Imani said. He was born in Atlanta, raised in English. I know. Ada's voice was heavy. Someone falsified that form, checked the wrong box, and nobody questioned it because nobody questions Oscar. Nobody questions Bethany. Nobody questions Judge Whitmore. The evidence in Imani's hands was explosive. Combined with her 11 months of documentation, combined with the statistical analysis, combined with the financial records. Why are you giving this to me? Ada was silent for a moment. Her hands, resting in her lap, had begun to tremble. Because I was a coward. The words came slowly, painfully. 4 years ago, I saw what they were doing. I documented it. I flagged it. And then they offered me money to go away, and I took it. I told myself it wasn't my fight, that someone else would notice, that the system would correct itself. She looked at Imani with eyes full of old grief. It didn't. And every day since, I've wondered how many people went to prison because I chose my pension over their freedom. She stood, moved to the window, looked out at the fading daylight. Darnell Okafor doesn't speak Spanish. Her voice hardened. But he spent 4 years in prison because Oscar Fuentes said he confessed in a language he doesn't understand. Because Bethany Crane checked a box that made him eligible for translation. Because Judge Whitmore convicted him based on testimony he never gave. She turned back to Imani. I've been waiting 4 years for someone to ask about this. Someone who might actually do something. Her eyes searched Imani's face. Are you that person? Imani held the transcript. Darnell's words, frozen in time. I wasn't there. I was at work. You can check the time clock. He's my cousin. Ada's expression shifted. Understanding. Recognition. Then you have more reason than most to finish what I couldn't start. This story is just getting started. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens at that Friday hearing. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because part 2 is going to blow your mind. Friday morning arrived gray and cold. Imani dressed carefully. Professional but not flashy. Navy suit, white blouse, low heels. The outfit of someone who took their work seriously but had nothing to prove. The notebook in her bag was new. The old one, 11 months of evidence, was locked in a safe deposit box at a bank in Atlanta. Copies of everything had been uploaded to the AG's encrypted server. Whatever happened today, the evidence was secure. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Hearing today. You ready? Calvin Rhodes, breaking protocol to check on her. She didn't reply, but she smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. The drive to the courthouse took 40 minutes. She arrived at 9:15, giving her time to settle, to review her notes, to prepare for whatever was coming. Grady was at the security checkpoint. His smile was sharper than usual. Big day. Every day's a big day when you do the work. He let her through without further comment, but his eyes followed her all the way to the elevator. Bethany's office was on the second floor. The door was closed when Imani arrived. She sat in a chair outside, watching courthouse employees drift past, none of them meeting her eyes. At 10 o'clock exactly, the door opened. "Miss Okafor." Bethany's voice carried no inflection. "Come in." The office had been rearranged. Bethany's desk was now positioned at the front of the room, like a judge's bench. Oscar Fuentes sat in a chair to the left, folder of documents in his lap. Grady stood by the window, arms crossed, blocking the natural light. And behind Bethany's desk, in a chair that had not been there before, sat Judge Harrison Whitmore. "Sit down," the judge said. His voice was deep, resonant, accustomed to being obeyed. "We have much to discuss." Imani sat. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. "This is a disciplinary hearing," Bethany began, reading from prepared notes. "Contract interpreter Imani Okafor is accused of the following violations: insubordination, deviation from established protocols, creating a hostile work environment, and—" She paused, glanced at Preston Lockwood, who had slipped into the room through a side door. "Solicitation of bribes." Preston, the defense attorney, the man who had tried to hand her an envelope of cash in the parking lot. "Mr. Lockwood has provided a sworn statement," Bethany continued. "He alleges that Ms. Okafor approached him on March 22nd and offered to alter translation records in exchange for $5,000. "That's false," Imani said. "We have evidence." Preston spoke for the first time, his smile thin as a razor. "The envelope you touched has your fingerprints. A witness saw you accept it." "I didn't accept anything. I photographed the envelope and left it on the ground." "Then where's the photograph?" The trap was closing. They had coordinated their stories, manufactured evidence, brought in the judge himself to preside over her termination. This was it, the moment she had been working toward for 11 months. "Before I respond to these allegations," Imani said, her voice steady, "I need to address a procedural matter." Judge Whitmore's eyebrows rose. "Procedural matter?" "Yes." Imani reached into her bag. "Pursuant to Georgia Code Section 15-1-8 and Title 28 U.S.C. Section 455, a judge must recuse when they have personal involvement in matters before them. I have no personal involvement in your employment dispute." "With respect, Your Honor, you do." She pulled out the first document. "Because this isn't an employment dispute." She held up the card, blue and white, official seal of the State Bar of Georgia. "My name is Imani Okafor. I am a licensed attorney. Bar number 742901. The room went silent. Bethany's face drained of color. Oscar's folder slipped from his fingers, papers scattering across the floor. Grady took a step forward, then stopped, uncertain. Only Judge Whitmore remained still, his expression frozen in careful neutrality. "For the past 11 months, Imani continued, I have been conducting an investigation authorized by the Georgia Attorney General's Office, Public Integrity Division." She pulled out the second document. Official letterhead, red seal. "This letter authorizes me to investigate allegations of judicial misconduct, evidence tampering, and systematic civil rights violations at Mercer County Superior Court. I operate under full protection of Georgia Code Section 45-18-4 regarding whistleblower protections and witness immunity." Preston Lockwood stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. This is—" "Sit down, Mr. Lockwood." Imani's voice cut through his protest. "You're a person of interest in this investigation. I recommend you remain present and silent until you've consulted with counsel who isn't facing disbarment." Preston's mouth opened, closed. He sat. Judge Whitmore leaned forward, his calm finally cracking. "You cannot." "I can." Imani stood now, documents in hand. "And I have. For 11 months I have documented 47 cases in which Oscar Fuentes systematically mistranslated defendant testimony. 47 people convicted based on words they never said. 47 lives destroyed because this courthouse decided that Hispanic defendants were easier to convict when no one could understand what they were actually saying." She turned to Oscar. The man had gone pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair like a drowning man clutching driftwood. 12 years, she said quietly. 12 years of lies, of taking innocent words and turning them into confessions, of watching people go to prison knowing you put them there. She held up Ada's transcript. Case number 2020-CR-1138, Darnell Okafor, my cousin. He said he wasn't there. You translated it as a confession. Oscar's voice was barely a whisper. I did what I was told. I know. Imani turned to face Judge Whitmore. And who told you, Oscar? Who decided which defendants needed help with translation? Who assigned interpreters to people who didn't need them? Who signed off on convictions based on testimony that never happened? The judge's hands had begun to shake. His carefully constructed composure was crumbling. You have no authority here, he said. This is my courthouse. It's the people's courthouse, and the people are done being lied to. The door opened. 2 men in dark suits entered, AG investigators. Imani had met them once in a conference room in Atlanta 11 months and a lifetime ago. Judge Harrison Whitmore, one of them said, you are hereby served with notice of investigation pursuant to Georgia Code Section 15-1-3, judicial misconduct. You are placed on administrative leave pending grand jury review. Whitmore rose from his chair, dignity shattered. This is political. This is accountability. Imani gathered her documents, sliding them into her bag. Something this courthouse hasn't seen in 19 years. She walked toward the door, pausing beside Grady. The bailiff hadn't moved from his position by the window. His face was gray, the bravado gone. Mr. Nichols, she said, those threats you made in the file room Wednesday night? My phone was recording. The AG has the audio. I'd recommend calling a lawyer. She left him standing there, frozen, as the world he had helped build began to collapse around him. In the hallway, Calvin Rhodes was waiting. 11 months, he said. You got everything? Everything and more. She looked back at the door, behind which Judge Whitmore was being read his rights. But we're not done. The money trail leads somewhere. Preston Lockwood is just a middleman. Someone else was funding this operation. Calvin nodded. We know. The investigation is expanding. How far? He was silent for a moment. Then, 3 other counties. Same pattern, same playbook. Imani closed her eyes. 3 other counties. Dozens more victims. Years more work. When she opened them, her resolve had hardened. Then we'd better get started. 4 days later, Imani sat across from Darnell in the visiting room at Georgia State Prison. Plexiglass between them. Phone receivers pressed to ears. The smell of industrial cleaner and institutional despair. They said my case is being reviewed, Darnell said. His voice was hoarse, uncertain. They said maybe I could get out. Your case is one of 23 being examined. The translation was falsified. The conviction was based on a lie. Imani pressed her hand against the glass. It's going to take time, but it's happening. 4 years. His eyes were wet. 4 years I've been saying I didn't do it. 4 years nobody listened. I listened. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry it took so long. Don't apologize. Darnell shook his head. You're the only one who believed me. The only one who did something. They sat in silence for a moment. Through the plexiglass, Imani could see the man her cousin had become. Harder, older, marked by years of injustice. When you get out, she said, We're having Auntie's jollof rice, the real stuff." He laughed. A real laugh, the first in years. "I'm holding you to that." That night, Imani sat in her apartment, staring at the stack of files on her kitchen table. The grand jury was convening in 6 weeks. The AG's office was building cases against Whitmore, Fuentes, Crane, and a growing list of conspirators. Preston Lockwood had lawyered up and was negotiating for reduced charges in exchange for testimony. The system was responding. Slowly, reluctantly, but responding. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You think you won. You exposed 1 courthouse. We have 12. She stared at the message for a long moment. Then she took a screenshot. Forwarded it to Calvin. Added 1 line. "Looks like I have more work to do." Outside her window, the Atlanta skyline glittered against the darkness. Somewhere out there, in courthouses across Georgia, the same lies were being told. The same innocent people were being convicted. The same corrupt officials were protecting themselves. But they didn't know what was coming. Imani picked up the first file, opened it, started reading. 1 courthouse down. 11 to go. The morning after the reveal, Imani woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Word had spread faster than she'd anticipated. Local news had picked up the story by midnight. Mercer County judge under investigation for judicial misconduct. And by 6 a.m. it had gone statewide. A photograph of Judge Whitmore being escorted from the courthouse by AG investigators played on every channel, his face frozen in an expression somewhere between outrage and disbelief. The messages were a mix of congratulations and warnings. Former colleagues from her civil rights firm, law school classmates, a cousin she hadn't spoken to in years, and 3 messages from numbers she didn't recognize. The first, "You've made powerful enemies. Watch your back." The second, "The judge has friends who don't forget." The third, 12 courthouses. You stopped 1. 11 remain. How long do you think you can keep running? Imani saved each message, forwarded them to Calvin, then deleted the originals from her phone. Evidence preserved. Trail minimized. Her apartment felt different now. Smaller. More exposed. The windows that had once offered a view of the Atlanta skyline now felt like vulnerabilities. Sight lines for anyone watching. Angles of approach for anyone hunting. She made coffee, reviewed her files, waited for Calvin's call. It came at 7:15. "Media's going crazy," he said without preamble. "AG's office is getting flooded with requests. They want interviews, statements, your name. My name stays out of it. Already handled. You're listed as a confidential informant in all official documents. But Imani..." He paused. "Someone leaked your photograph. It's circulating on local message boards. The interpreter who brought down Judge Whitmore. They're calling you a hero. And a target." "That too." His voice hardened. "We're assigning security. Unmarked car outside your building. Check-ins every 4 hours. You see anything suspicious, you call immediately." "I can handle myself." "I know you can. But these people have resources, connections, and they're scared." Another pause. "Scared people do desperate things." Imani looked out the window at the city waking up below. Somewhere out there, someone was already planning how to stop her. "What's our next move?" "Grand jury convenes in 6 weeks. We need to lock down testimony from every witness we've identified. Oscar Fuentes, Bethany Crane, Preston Lockwood, if his lawyer stops playing games, and we need to trace that money." The anonymous donor. $42,000 to the Mercer County Community Foundation over 4 years. More than Lockwood contributed. Account traces to a shell company in Delaware. We're working with federal partners, but these things take time. Everything takes time. Calvin's frustration was audible. Meanwhile, Whitmore's out on bail. His attorney filed a motion to dismiss yesterday. Claims political persecution, prosecutorial overreach. "It won't work, but it'll slow us down." "And the other courthouses?" The text mentioned 12. Silence on the line. Then, "We're looking into it. Preliminary analysis shows similar patterns in 3 other counties. High conviction rates. Single interpreters handling majority of cases. Foundation donations that don't add up. 3 confirmed, 9 more suspected. Something like that. Calvin's voice dropped. Imani, this is bigger than we thought. If the pattern holds, we're looking at hundreds of wrongful convictions, maybe thousands, spread across a decade or more. The weight of it settled on her shoulders. Hundreds of people, thousands of families, lives destroyed by a system designed to destroy them. Then we'd better work fast. The first week after the reveal was a blur of depositions, evidence reviews, and security protocols. Imani spent her days at the AG's office in Atlanta, working through stacks of case files, identifying victims, building timelines. Every evening, she returned to her apartment under escort, checked the locks twice, and slept with her phone on the pillow beside her. Oscar Fuentes had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His attorney, not Preston Lockwood, who had his own problems, was negotiating terms for cooperation. The offer on the table: reduced charges in exchange for testimony about who had directed the mistranslation scheme. Bethany Crane had hired a crisis management firm. Her public statement expressed shock and dismay at the allegations and promised full cooperation with investigators. Behind closed doors, according to sources inside the courthouse, she was shredding documents. Judge Whitmore maintained his innocence. His attorney gave interviews to anyone who would listen, painting the investigation as a political witch hunt, the AG's office as overzealous prosecutors destroying a good man's reputation. The public was divided. Some saw Whitmore as a villain finally exposed. Others saw him as a victim of liberal overreach. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Death threats mixed with declarations of support. And somewhere in the chaos, the person behind the anonymous donations continued to hide. Day 8. The first physical confrontation. Imani had stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of Atlanta, her security detail temporarily delayed by traffic. She was pumping gas, watching the numbers climb on the display, when a black SUV pulled into the station and parked at the pump beside her. The driver didn't get out, didn't pump gas, just sat there, engine running, windows tinted too dark to see through. Imani's hand moved to her phone. She typed a quick message to Calvin: black SUV, plate number unclear, gas station on Peachtree Industrial, then finished pumping and walked toward the station to pay. The SUV door opened. A man stepped out. White, mid-40s. Built like someone who spent hours in the gym and wanted everyone to know it. He wore a polo shirt and khakis, the uniform of suburban respectability, but his eyes were cold. Ms. Okafor. He didn't phrase it as a question. Imani stopped walking. 10 feet between them, close enough to talk, far enough to run. Do I know you? No, but I know you. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You've been making a lot of noise lately, causing problems for people who don't like problems. And you're here to deliver a message. I'm here to offer advice. He took a step closer. What you're doing, this investigation, these accusations, it's not going to end the way you think. The people you're threatening, they've been doing this a long time. They know how to protect themselves, how to make problems disappear. Is that a threat? It's reality. Another step. You think taking down one judge changes anything? There are 100 more like him, 1,000. The system doesn't break because one person starts asking questions. The system adapts, absorbs, eliminates the threat. And I'm the threat. You're an inconvenience. His smile widened. Right now. But inconveniences can become threats, and threats, he shrugged, threats get handled. A car pulled into the station. An elderly woman, oblivious to the tension, maneuvering toward a pump. The man glanced at her, then back at Imani. Think about what I said. Think about whether this fight is worth what it's going to cost you. He turned back toward his SUV. Because the price is going to be higher than you can imagine. He got in. The engine revved. The SUV pulled out of the station and disappeared into traffic. Imani stood alone by the pumps, heart pounding, hands steady. She memorized what she could of the license plate, partial, obscured by mud that looked deliberately applied, and added it to her message to Calvin. Contact made. Male, white, mid-40s. Threatened elimination of threats. License plate partial. Georgia, ends in 743. SUV black, late model, tinted windows. Send. Then she got in her car and drove, checking her mirrors every 30 seconds until the security detail caught up with her on the highway. If this story is hitting close to home, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment, because the corruption we're exposing goes deeper than anyone imagined. Week 2. The money trail grew colder. The Delaware Shell Company, Piedmont Holdings, LLC, had been dissolved 3 days after the investigation went public. Its registered agent was a law firm in Wilmington that specialized in corporate privacy. They refused to disclose client information without a federal subpoena. The subpoena was filed. The law firm's attorneys filed a motion to quash. The motion was denied. The law firm appealed. The appeal was pending. Legal maneuvering, the favorite weapon of the wealthy and guilty. Meanwhile, Calvin's team had made progress on another front. "Grady Nichols wants to talk," Calvin said during their morning briefing. "His attorney reached out yesterday. He's willing to provide testimony in exchange for reduced charges." "What's he offering?" "Names, dates, details about how the scheme operated, and something else." Calvin slid a document across the table. "He says he received instructions from someone outside the courthouse, phone calls from a blocked number, male voice, told him when to apply pressure, when to back off, who to target." "The same person behind the text messages?" "Possibly. Grady says the voice knew things, scheduling, internal politics, who was asking questions. Insider knowledge." Imani studied the document. Grady's preliminary statement, transcribed from his attorney's summary. The details were vague but suggestive. Someone was running this operation from outside, using Whitmore and the others as frontmen. "That's our theory." Calvin leaned back in his chair. "The question is who, and how high it goes. The $42,000, if we can trace the source, we're working on it. Federal partners have the financial data, but shell companies within shell companies, offshore accounts, cryptocurrency exchanges, it's a maze designed to be unsolvable." "Nothing's unsolvable, just time-consuming." "Time we might not have." Calvin's expression darkened. "Whitmore's attorney is pushing for a speedy trial, claims his client's constitutional rights are being violated by the delay. If the judge grants the motion, we could be looking at trial in 4 months instead of 8. And our case? Strong but incomplete. We have the pattern. We have testimony from victims. We have Oscar's translations and Ada's transcripts. But without the financial connection, without proof that money changed hands for specific outcomes, we're looking at misconduct charges, not corruption charges. The difference is years in prison versus a slap on the wrist." Imani stood, walked to the window. The Atlanta skyline stretched before her, gleaming glass and steel, a city built on ambition and compromise. "Then we need to work faster. We're doing everything we can. It's not enough." She turned back to face him. "The person behind this is still out there, still protected, still capable of doing everything they did in Mercer County somewhere else. We need to find them." "How?" "By following what they can't hide." She grabbed her bag, headed for the door. "Money can be moved through shell companies. Phone calls can be made from burner phones. But real estate? Property transfers? Those leave records, public records, and whoever funded this operation, they have to live somewhere, own something, exist in the physical world." Calvin stood. "Where are you going?" "The county assessor's office. Every county in Georgia makes property records available online. If our mystery donor owns anything in any of the counties with suspicious conviction rates, I'll find it. That's hundreds of thousands of records. Then I'd better start now. 3 days later, she found it. The property was a hunting lodge in Carroll County, 60 miles west of Atlanta. 40 acres of woodland, a 6,000-square-foot main house, guest quarters, and a private airstrip. Purchased in 2017 for $2.3 million. Cash transaction, no mortgage. The buyer, Blue Ridge Ventures LLC, a Delaware corporation. Registered agent, the same law firm in Wilmington that represented Piedmont Holdings. Same lawyers, same structure, same person hiding behind corporate shields. But Blue Ridge Ventures had made one mistake. The property purchase required disclosure of beneficial ownership to the county tax assessor. Georgia law, enacted in 2019, required all LLCs owning real property to file annual reports identifying their owners. The 2023 report listed a single member, Marcus Webb. Imani stared at the name. It meant nothing to her. She ran it through every database she could access: court records, business filings, professional licenses, news archives. The results made her blood run cold. Marcus Webb, 57 years old, former prosecutor, current position, Deputy Attorney General of Georgia, Public Integrity Division. Calvin's boss. The man who had signed her authorization letter. The man who had overseen her investigation from the beginning. The man who had been running the corruption he was supposed to be fighting. Imani didn't go to Calvin. She couldn't. If Webb was behind this, he had access to everything: communications, evidence, strategy. Going to Calvin meant going through channels that Webb could monitor, intercept, compromise. Instead, she went to the one person she knew was clean. Ada Simmons opened her door at 10 p.m., looked at Imani's face, and stepped aside without a word. "I need help," Imani said, "and I need it off the books." "Tell me." Imani laid out everything: the property records, the shell company connections, the name that had appeared like a bomb in the middle of her investigation. Ada listened in silence. When Imani finished, the older woman walked to her window and stood there for a long moment, looking out at the darkness. "Marcus Webb." Her voice was flat. "I know that name. He came through Mercer County 15 years ago, prosecutor's office, ambitious, smart. Everyone said he was going places." She turned back to Imani. "Turns out they were right. He's been protecting them, all of them, using his position to shield the operation, warn them when investigations got too close. And now he's using his position to control your investigation, which means everything I've gathered is compromised." Ada's eyes were hard. "If he has access to your evidence, he knows what you know. And more importantly, he knows what you don't know." Imani sank into a chair. The weight of it was crushing. 11 months of work. Hundreds of hours of documentation. All of it potentially worthless because the man at the top was the enemy she'd been hunting. "What do I do?" Ada was quiet for a moment. Then she walked to her closet, opened it, and pulled out a box. Different from the others, smaller, locked with a combination padlock. 30 years as a court reporter," she said, working the combination. "You see a lot, hear a lot, and if you're smart, you document a lot." The lock clicked open. "When I retired, I kept more than transcripts. I kept insurance." Inside the box, folders, dozens of them, labeled with names, dates, case numbers. "I wasn't always a coward." Ada pulled out a folder, handed it to Imani. "Before they offered me the retirement package, I was building my own case, documenting what I saw, preparing to go to the authorities." She laughed, bitter. "I just didn't know the authorities were part of the problem." Imani opened the folder. Inside, photographs, financial documents, handwritten notes, and a photograph that made her stop breathing. Marcus Webb. Younger, thinner, but unmistakably him. Standing beside Judge Harrison Whitmore at what looked like a hunting lodge, both men smiling, both holding rifles, both completely unaware that a court reporter with a telephoto lens was documenting their meeting. The photograph was dated November 2018, 6 months before Darnell's conviction. They've been working together for years, Ada said. Webb set up the whole thing, found the judges, recruited the interpreters, created the shell companies to move the money. He's not just protecting them, he built them. Why? Power, money, the usual. Ada shrugged. But mostly, I think, because he could. Because he found a way to profit from injustice, and disguised it as justice. And because no one was watching closely enough to stop him. Imani looked at the photograph. 2 men, 2 rifles, 2 decades of corruption. I'm going to stop him. How? He controls the investigation. He has access to everything you've built. Not everything. Imani pulled out her phone. The AG's office isn't the only authority in Georgia, and corruption by a state official is a federal crime. She dialed a number she'd memorized months ago, a number Calvin had given her for emergencies only. FBI, Public Corruption Unit, Atlanta Field Office. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. Special Agent Torres? My name is Imani Okafor. I'm an attorney working undercover for the Georgia AG's office, and I need to report corruption at the highest levels of state government. Week 4. The investigation split in 2. On the surface, nothing changed. Imani continued attending briefings at the AG's office, reviewing evidence, preparing for grand jury testimony. Calvin continued coordinating witness interviews and document production. Marcus Webb continued overseeing everything, his signature on every authorization, his fingerprints on every decision. But beneath the surface, a second investigation was underway. The FBI moved quietly. Special Agent Maria Torres, 15 years in public corruption, a reputation for taking down untouchable targets, assembled a team that operated completely outside state channels. They obtained federal subpoenas for the Delaware law firm's records. They traced financial transactions through cryptocurrency exchanges that the state investigators had overlooked. They built a parallel case that Marcus Webb knew nothing about. Imani became a double agent in her own investigation, feeding accurate information to Torres while feeding carefully selected information to Calvin, enough to maintain her cover, not enough to warn Webb that the walls were closing in. It was exhausting, terrifying, and necessary. The break came on a Thursday afternoon. Torres called at 3 p.m. We got the records. The Delaware firm rolled over when we threatened RICO charges against their partners. Full disclosure of beneficial ownership for both shell companies. And? Marcus Webb is the sole owner of Piedmont Holdings and Blue Ridge Ventures. The $42,000 to the Mercer County Foundation came from his personal accounts, routed through 4 different entities to obscure the source. We have bank records, wire transfers, everything. Imani closed her eyes, relief and rage in equal measure. There's more. Torres's voice was grim. Webb's not just funding the Mercer County operation. The same shell companies made payments to foundations in Carroll, Douglas, and Haralson counties. Same pattern, same amounts, same timing. 4 counties confirmed, with evidence suggesting involvement in at least 4 more. This isn't a local corruption scheme, Imani. This is a statewide network, and Marcus Webb has been running it for at least a decade. The arrest came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning. Marcus Webb arrived at his office at 8 a.m., as he did every day. He greeted his assistant, poured a cup of coffee, and sat down at his desk to review the day's schedule. At 8:15, 4 FBI agents walked through his door. Marcus Webb. Torres held up her badge. You're under arrest for conspiracy to deprive citizens of civil rights under color of law, in violation of Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, wire fraud, in violation of Section 1343, obstruction of justice, in violation of Section 1519, and RICO conspiracy, in violation of Section 1962. Webb's face went gray. His coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. You have the right to remain silent, Torres continued. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The handcuffs clicked shut. The Deputy Attorney General of Georgia, the man who had built an empire on stolen justice, was led from his office in full view of his colleagues, his subordinates, and the security cameras that would broadcast his perp walk to every news station in the state. Imani watched from a conference room down the hall. Calvin stood beside her, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "Imani, I swear, I didn't know." "I believe you." And she did. Calvin had been a pawn, just like the rest of them, used by Webb to provide legitimacy to investigations that were designed to fail. But we have work to do. The grand jury convenes in 2 weeks, and now we have a real case to present. This is the moment everything changes. If you're invested in seeing justice served, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed, because the grand jury testimony is about to blow this case wide open. The federal grand jury convened on the first Monday of April. The proceedings were sealed. Grand jury testimony was secret by law, protected to encourage witnesses to speak freely without fear of retaliation. But the courthouse hallways buzzed with attorneys, reporters, and observers trying to piece together what was happening behind closed doors. Imani testified on day 1. She walked the grand jurors through 11 months of investigation, the patterns she'd observed, the documents she'd gathered, the threats she'd received. She explained how Oscar Fuentes had systematically mistranslated testimony, how Bethany Crane had falsified language assessment forms, how Judge Whitmore had presided over convictions he knew were based on lies, and how Marcus Webb had orchestrated all of it from the shadows, using his position as Deputy Attorney General to protect the conspirators and silence anyone who got too close. The prosecutors, federal now, not state, presented financial records showing money flowing from Webb's accounts to the foundations in 4 counties. They showed property records linking Webb to the hunting lodge where he'd met with Whitmore and others. They showed phone records, email chains, text messages recovered from devices that Webb had thought were secure. The evidence was overwhelming. Oscar Fuentes testified on day 2. The interpreter had aged a decade in the weeks since his arrest. His voice trembled as he described how he'd been recruited by Bethany Crane 12 years earlier, how she'd explained that certain cases needed special handling, how he'd been paid in cash, small amounts at first, then larger as his role expanded. "I knew it was wrong," he said, unable to meet the jurors' eyes. "But they made it easy. They told me I was helping the court run efficiently, that the defendants were guilty anyway, that I was just smoothing the process." The prosecutor pressed him. "And when you translated 'I wasn't there' as 'I was present and struck the victim'?" Oscar's face crumpled. "They told me what to say, gave me scripts for certain cases. I read the scripts." "Who gave you the scripts?" "Ms. Crane. Sometimes the judge. And sometimes—" He stopped, swallowed. "Sometimes a man I never saw. Phone calls, blocked number. He'd tell me which cases were special, what the translation needed to say." "Did you recognize the voice?" "No, but he knew everything. Case numbers, defendant names, what was going to happen before it happened." Oscar's hands were shaking. "I think he was running the whole thing. I just never knew who he was." The prosecutor produced a recording, audio captured from Oscar's phone during a call 3 years earlier. The voice on the other end was distorted but recognizable. "Make sure the Hernandez case goes the way we discussed. The judge has his instructions. You have yours. And remember, no improvisation. Just read the script." The voice belonged to Marcus Webb. Oscar broke down in tears. The grand jury watched in silence. Bethany Crane testified on day 3. She had cut a deal, full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Her attorney had negotiated terms that would keep her out of federal prison, barely, in return for testimony that filled in the gaps. "Judge Whitmore brought me in," she explained, her voice flat, emotionless. 15 years ago. He said he had a system that could make us all wealthy. All I had to do was manage the paperwork, assign the right interpreters to the right cases, make sure the documentation looked clean." "And the language assessment forms? The ones that assigned interpreters to defendants who didn't need them?" Bethany nodded. I filled those out, or had my staff fill them out. We'd flag certain cases, defendants who looked like they might cause trouble, who had public defenders who might actually pay attention. Then we'd assign Oscar, and he'd handle the rest. How did you identify which cases to flag? Instructions, from the Foundation. She produced documents, copies of emails, spreadsheets, coded messages. They'd send lists, defendant names, case numbers, desired outcomes. We called them priority cases. The Foundation funded our overtime, our equipment upgrades, our holiday bonuses. In exchange, we made sure the priority cases went the right way. And who ran the Foundation? Bethany looked at the prosecutors with something like satisfaction. Marcus Webb. He set the whole thing up, used his connections in the AG's office to identify cases that could be manipulated, used his power to make sure no one looked too closely, and used us. Her voice cracked just slightly. Used us to do his dirty work while he kept his hands clean. The grand jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, they handed the lead prosecutor a sealed envelope containing their decision. The grand jury has returned true bills on all counts, the prosecutor announced. Marcus Webb, Harrison Whitmore, Oscar Fuentes, Bethany Crane, and Preston Lockwood. Indicted on charges of conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and RICO conspiracy. Additional indictments for Grady Nichols on charges of witness intimidation and assault. The indictments were unsealed that afternoon. News stations interrupted regular programming. The Attorney General of Georgia held an emergency press conference to express shock and outrage at the corruption within his own office and to promise full accountability for everyone involved. Marcus Webb was denied bail. Judge Whitmore was denied bail. The others were released on conditions that included GPS monitoring and surrender of passports. The network was broken. The conspirators were facing federal prison, but the work was far from finished. 2 months later, the case reviews began. The Georgia Innocence Project partnered with the AG's office, now under new leadership, to examine every case that had involved Oscar Fuentes as interpreter. 147 cases in total, spanning 12 years of manufactured testimony and stolen lives. The first 3 convictions were vacated within weeks. Maria Gonzalez, shoplifting. Her confession had been entirely fabricated. She walked out of county jail and into the arms of her daughter, who had been 8 years old when her mother was taken away. Eduardo Ramirez, possession with intent. The translation that had turned "my friend gave it to me to hold" into "I knew it was illegal" was thrown out. His conviction was overturned. 3 years of his life erased by a judge's signature. Jorge Mendez, assault. He had testified that he was defending his wife from her abusive ex-husband. Oscar had translated it as an unprovoked attack. Jorge had served 7 years. His wife had died while he was in prison, never knowing that her husband had been convicted for protecting her. Imani attended each hearing, watched each defendant walk free, carried each story with her as evidence of what the system had done, and what it could do when forced to confront its failures. Darnell's case was the 4th to be reviewed. The hearing took place on a Wednesday morning in June. The same courthouse where he'd been convicted. Different judge, one appointed specifically to handle case reviews, with no connection to the corruption. Imani sat in the gallery, hands clasped in her lap, as the prosecutor presented the evidence. Ada's transcript, the falsified language assessment form, Oscar's testimony about receiving scripts for specific cases. Darnell sat at the defense table, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, borrowed from a cousin, since his own clothes no longer existed after 4 years in prison. His attorney, provided by the Innocence Project, argued for immediate release. The prosecutor didn't oppose. The judge reviewed the evidence for 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours. Then she looked up, met Darnell's eyes, and spoke. Mr. Okafor, the state of Georgia owes you an apology that can never be adequate. You were convicted of a crime based on testimony you never gave, translated from a language you don't speak, in a proceeding designed to deny you justice. She paused. The conviction in case number 2020-CR-1138 is hereby vacated. You are free to go." Darnell didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, tears streaming down his face as the words sank in. Free. After 4 years. Free. Imani pushed through the gallery rail, wrapped her arms around her cousin, and held him while he sobbed. "You did it," he whispered. "You actually did it." "We did it." She pulled back, looked at him. "And we're not done. There are 100 more people like you, people who need someone to fight for them." Darnell wiped his eyes, straightened his borrowed suit. "Then let's get to work." The policy reforms were announced in July. A press conference at the state capitol. The governor, the new attorney general, the heads of various oversight agencies. All of them standing before cameras, promising change. "Effective immediately," the attorney general declared, "all interpreter assignments in Georgia courts will be subject to random audit. Court reporter transcripts will be compared against audio recordings in every case involving translation services. Defendants will have the right to request independent interpreter review at any stage of proceedings." More announcements followed. A civilian oversight board for the court system. Mandatory training on implicit bias for all court employees. A hotline for reporting misconduct. A fund to compensate victims of wrongful conviction. The policies were comprehensive. The implementation timeline was 18 months. Whether they would actually be enforced, that remained to be seen. August brought the trials. Marcus Webb went first. His attorney, one of the most expensive criminal defense lawyers in the Southeast, argued that Webb had been a visionary prosecutor brought down by political enemies, that the financial transactions were legitimate consulting arrangements, that the shell companies were standard asset protection, nothing more. The jury didn't buy it. After 6 days of testimony and 4 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Webb was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Judge Whitmore went next. His defense was similar: dedicated public servant, victim of overzealous prosecution. But the evidence was overwhelming: the financial records, the photographs with Webb, the testimony from Oscar and Bethany describing how he'd directed specific outcomes in specific cases. Guilty on all counts. 18 years. Oscar Fuentes pleaded guilty before trial. His cooperation earned him a reduced sentence, 5 years, with possibility of parole after 3. He would spend those years knowing that every day behind bars was a fraction of the time his victims had lost. Bethany Crane received probation. Her early cooperation and testimony against the others had earned her leniency that many felt she didn't deserve. She would spend the rest of her life as a convicted felon, barred from any position of public trust. Preston Lockwood was disbarred. Criminal charges were dropped in exchange for testimony, but his legal career was over. The last anyone heard, he was selling insurance in a small town near the Florida border. Grady Nichols served 18 months for witness intimidation. When he was released, he moved to Alabama and never spoke publicly about what had happened. Justice, such as it was, imperfect, incomplete, but real. Imani stood in the community center on a September evening, looking out at the faces gathered before her. 23 of them, former defendants whose convictions had been vacated. Some had served years in prison. Others had lost jobs, homes, families because of charges that were later dropped. All of them had been targeted by a system designed to destroy them. Now they were together. Survivors, witnesses, advocates. "I want to thank you for coming," Imani said. "I know it's not easy to be here, to face what was done to you, to relive the worst moments of your lives." She paused, looked at Darnell standing at the back of the room, and continued. "But I also want you to know that your stories matter. Your experiences matter. The injustice you suffered. It's not just your burden to carry. It's evidence. Evidence of what happens when the system fails. Evidence of what we need to change." Maria Gonzalez raised her hand. "What can we do? They took years from us." How do we get that back? You can't. Imani's voice was gentle but honest. Nothing can give you back the time you lost, the moments with your families, the opportunities that passed you by. That's the truth, and I won't pretend otherwise. She stepped closer to the group. But you can make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. You can testify at legislative hearings. You can speak to journalists. You can put a human face on statistics that politicians want to ignore. You can make it impossible for them to look away. Jorge Mendez spoke from the second row. Will they listen? Some will, some won't. Imani shrugged. But the ones who don't listen now will have to answer for it later. Because we're not going away. We're not being quiet, and we're not giving up until the system that destroyed our lives is rebuilt from the ground up. The room was silent for a moment. Then Darnell started clapping. Slow at first, then faster. Others joined in. Soon the entire room was on its feet, applauding not for Imani, but for themselves, for their survival, for their refusal to be erased. When the applause faded, Marisol Vega approached. The woman whose case had first shown Imani the depth of the corruption, whose words had been twisted into weapons against her. Miss Okafor. Her English had improved in the months since her conviction was overturned. I want to thank you. For believing me when no one else did. For fighting when it would have been easier to stay quiet. You don't need to thank me. I was just doing my job. No. Marisol shook her head. You were doing more than your job. You were doing what was right. And that... She paused, searching for the words. That is something I will never forget. She pressed something into Imani's hand. A small cross on a silver chain. Simple. Worn. My mother gave me this when I came to this country, Marisol said. She told me it would protect me. I want you to have it, because you protected me when I couldn't protect myself. Imani looked at the cross, then at Marisol. The woman's eyes were bright with tears. I can't accept this. You can. You must. Marisol closed Imani's fingers around the chain. Because there are others out there. Others who need someone to fight for them. And when you find them, she smiled through her tears. You will remember why the fight matters. We're almost at the end of this story, but the fight for justice never really ends. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you're subscribed, because the final chapter reveals something no one saw coming. October. 3 months after the convictions. 6 months after the grand jury. Imani sat in Calvin Rhodes's office, now the acting Deputy Attorney General's office, since Marcus Webb's arrest had left a vacancy that no one was eager to fill. The Carroll County investigation is moving forward, Calvin said. Same pattern as Mercer. Different players, same playbook. Federal partners are coordinating with our office. How many cases affected? Early estimates suggest 60 to 70. Might be higher once we get full access to the records. Imani nodded. Another county. Another set of victims. Another system to dismantle. There's something else. Calvin slid a folder across the desk. We traced the final payment from Webb's accounts, the one that went out 2 days before his arrest. Imani opened the folder. Bank records. Wire transfers. A destination account she didn't recognize. Haralson County Community Foundation, Calvin said. $50,000. Enough to fund operations for another 2 years. He was preparing for the future, even while everything was falling apart. That's not the worst part. Calvin pointed to a name on the transfer. The recipient signature. We ran it against handwriting samples. It matches. Imani read the name. Her blood went cold. Judge Raymond Price, Haralson County Superior Court. Another judge. Another county. Another thread in a web that seemed to have no end. How many of them are there? We don't know. Calvin's voice was heavy. Webb's records are incomplete. He was careful, kept most of the network compartmentalized. The people in Mercer County didn't know about Carroll. Carroll didn't know about Douglas. Each operation was isolated, connected only through Webb. So now that Webb's gone, the operations are orphaned, running on autopilot. But still running. Calvin leaned forward. We need to find them, all of them, before they destroy any more lives. Imani looked at the folder in her hands. Judge Raymond Price, $50,000. A future built on stolen justice. Then we'd better get started. The weeks that followed were a blur of investigation, coordination, and careful prosecution. Judge Price was arrested in November. His network in Haralson County proved smaller than Webb's, but no less destructive. 31 wrongful convictions over 8 years, all involving Hispanic defendants, all involving translation errors that favored the prosecution. Douglas County followed in December, Carroll County in January. By spring, the federal investigation had expanded to include 8 counties across Georgia, with preliminary evidence suggesting involvement in at least 4 more. The scope was staggering. Hundreds of victims, dozens of conspirators, a network that had operated for more than a decade, hidden in plain sight, protected by the very institutions designed to prevent such corruption. Imani worked on all of it, reviewing case files, interviewing witnesses, testifying at trials and hearings and legislative sessions, becoming, without intending to, the public face of a movement that had started with a single question: what happened to my cousin? The media called her a hero. Politicians invited her to speak at fundraisers and policy conferences. Law schools offered her teaching positions. Nonprofit organizations offered her leadership roles. She turned them all down. "I'm not finished," she explained to Calvin during one of their regular briefings. "The network is broken, but the pieces are still out there. Judges who took money but were never caught. Interpreters who falsified testimony but covered their tracks. Administrators who enabled corruption but maintained plausible deniability. You can't catch everyone." "No, but I can try." She gathered her files, stood to leave. "And I can make sure that when the next person comes along, the next Darnell, the next Maria, the next Jorge, there's someone in place who knows what to look for, who knows how to fight." "What does that look like?" Imani paused at the door. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to find out." 1 year after the reveal. April. Imani stood before a classroom of law students at Emory University, guest lecturing on civil rights enforcement. "The system isn't broken," she told them. "That's the lie they want you to believe, that corruption is a malfunction, an aberration, something that happens when good systems go wrong." She walked to the whiteboard, wrote 3 words: design, not defect. The truth is that systems work exactly as they're designed to work. If the design privileges power over justice, the system will produce injustice. If the design protects the powerful from accountability, the system will enable corruption. The question isn't how to fix broken systems. The question is how to redesign them. A hand went up. A hand went. Young woman, front row, eager expression. "How do you redesign something as big as the court system?" "One case at a time," Imani smiled. "One witness at a time. One piece of evidence at a time. You find the people who are harmed by the system, and you listen to them. You find the gaps in the design, and you fill them. You find the powerful people who benefit from injustice, and you hold them accountable." "But how do you know who to trust? If the Deputy Attorney General was corrupt, how do you know anyone is clean?" The question hung in the air. Imani let it sit for a moment before answering. "You don't, not for certain. Trust is a risk you take because the alternative, assuming everyone is corrupt, that no one can be relied upon, makes the work impossible." She paused. "But you can minimize the risk. You document everything. You create redundant systems for preserving evidence. You build networks of people who can verify and validate what you're seeing, and you never, ever rely on a single point of authority." She looked around the room. 30 faces, 30 potential advocates for justice. You are the next generation of lawyers. Some of you will prosecute, some will defend, some will judge. All of you will have the power to shape how the system works. She tapped the whiteboard. Design, not defect. Remember that. And when you're in a position to make decisions about cases, about policies, about careers, remember the people whose lives depend on those decisions. The lecture ended. Students gathered their things, chatted among themselves, drifted toward the door. The young woman from the front row approached. Ms. Okafor, I wanted to ask, I'm interested in civil rights work, public interest law, but everyone says there's no money in it, that I should go corporate, pay off my loans, then think about impact work later. Imani studied her. Idealism fighting pragmatism. A battle she remembered well. What's your name? Keisha Williams. Keisha, let me tell you something about money. Imani leaned against the desk. The people who corrupted Mercer County? They weren't poor. Marcus Webb had a hunting lodge worth $2 million. Judge Whitmore owned 3 properties. Preston Lockwood drove a car that cost more than most people make in a year. She straightened, met Keisha's eyes directly. Money doesn't protect you from corruption. Sometimes it enables it, and the lawyers who make the most money are often the ones who enable the most harm. She shrugged. But that's a choice you'll have to make for yourself. I can't tell you what's right for your life. What did you choose? Imani smiled. I chose to spend 11 months pretending to be a contract interpreter so I could bring down a network of corrupt judges. It didn't pay well, but I sleep fine at night. Keisha laughed. That's not a normal career path. No, but normal career paths lead to normal outcomes, and sometimes, Imani gathered her things, headed for the door. Sometimes, normal isn't good enough. 6 months later, October of the following year. The ceremony took place in the rotunda of the Georgia State Capitol. Governor, Attorney General, legislative leaders, and 200 guests gathered to witness the signing of the Georgia Judicial Accountability Act. The legislation was comprehensive. Mandatory audio recording of all court proceedings, random audits of interpreter services, independent review of all cases involving translation, a victims' compensation fund, a whistleblower protection program, and the establishment of a permanent Office of Judicial Integrity, empowered to investigate misconduct at every level of the court system. Imani stood at the back of the crowd, watching as the governor signed the bill into law. This legislation represents our commitment to justice, the governor declared, to transparency, to accountability, and to the victims who suffered because we failed to provide those things. Applause filled the rotunda. Cameras flashed. Politicians smiled for photographs. Imani didn't applaud. The legislation was good, important, necessary. But legislation was only as effective as its enforcement. And enforcement required political will that could evaporate with the next election cycle, the next budget crisis, the next scandal that demanded attention. The work wasn't finished, would never be finished. The system would always need people willing to watch it, challenge it, hold it accountable. After the ceremony, the new Attorney General approached her. Ms. Okafor, I'd like to offer you a position. I'm not interested in government work. I know. He smiled. That's why I want you. The Office of Judicial Integrity needs a director, someone who isn't afraid to investigate judges, prosecutors, even attorneys general. Someone who has demonstrated they can't be bought, intimidated, or silenced. Imani considered the offer. Government work meant bureaucracy, politics, compromise, but it also meant power, access, the ability to protect future victims before they became victims. I have conditions. Name them. Full independence, no political interference, the authority to investigate anyone, regardless of position or party, and a staff I choose myself, people with no ties to the old network. The Attorney General nodded. Done. And one more thing. Imani looked him in the eye. If I ever find evidence that you're corrupt, I will come after you with everything I have. No exceptions. No mercy. A pause, then, that's exactly what I'm counting on. Epilogue. Darnell Okafor graduated from Georgia State University with a degree in social work. He now runs a nonprofit that provides support services to formerly incarcerated individuals. His office is decorated with photographs of people he's helped, men and women rebuilding their lives after the system tried to destroy them. On his desk, in a small frame, is a photograph of him and Imani at his graduation, both of them smiling, both of them free. Ada Simmons received a commendation from the Georgia Attorney General's office for her role in preserving evidence that proved critical to the prosecution. She continues to maintain her archive of court transcripts, now digitized and stored in multiple secure locations. She says she'll keep them until she dies, just in case someone needs them. Marisol Vega's case was dismissed with prejudice. She was reunited with her daughter and now works as a translator for a legal aid organization that serves immigrant communities. She tells everyone who will listen about the interpreter who believed her when no one else did. The network Marcus Webb built was dismantled piece by piece, 12 courthouses, as the anonymous text had claimed. 207 wrongful convictions identified, 143 overturned, 64 still under review. The work continues. And Imani Okafor sits in her office at the Georgia Office of Judicial Integrity, reviewing case files, fielding whistleblower complaints, and waiting for the next person to walk through her door with a story about injustice that no one else will believe. Her phone buzzes. Text from an unknown number. Ms. Okafor. I work at a courthouse in South Georgia. I've seen things that shouldn't be happening. I don't know who else to call. She picks up the phone, begins typing a response. Tell me everything. The fight never ends, but neither does she. 18 months after the Georgia Judicial Accountability Act became law, Imani Okafor received a phone call that would pull her back into the darkness she thought she had left behind. The caller identified herself as Rosa Delgado, 31 years old, legal secretary at a small firm in Valdosta, near the Florida border. Her voice trembled as she spoke. My brother is in Lowndes County Jail. He's been there for 3 weeks. No charges filed, no arraignment scheduled, no access to an attorney. Imani set down her coffee. 3 weeks without charges? They keep saying the paperwork is delayed, that the prosecutor is reviewing the case. But I called the prosecutor's office, and they said they never received any paperwork. Rosa's voice cracked. Miss Okafor, my brother doesn't speak much English. He came here from Honduras 2 years ago. He works construction. He's never been in trouble, and now he's disappeared into that jail and no one will tell me what's happening. What was he allegedly arrested for? They won't say. The sheriff's office claims it's under investigation. But 3 weeks? Without even telling him what he's accused of? Imani pulled up the Lowndes County Court database on her computer, searched for the name Rosa provided, Miguel Delgado. No results, no arrest record, no case number, no documentation of any kind. A man had been sitting in jail for 3 weeks, and according to the official system, he didn't exist. Ms. Delgado, I'm going to need you to come to Atlanta. Bring every document you have, any paperwork from the jail, any receipts for commissary deposits, anything that proves your brother is being held. Can you do that? Yes, I can be there tomorrow. Good. Imani's voice hardened. Because what you're describing isn't a bureaucratic delay. It's a disappearance. And we're going to find out who's responsible. Rosa Delgado arrived at Imani's office at 9 a.m. the following morning. She was small, dark-haired, with the exhausted eyes of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. She carried a manila folder stuffed with papers, commissary receipts, visitor logs, handwritten notes from phone calls with jail staff. Imani spread the documents across her conference table. You visited him on March 3rd, she said, examining a visitor log. The jail has a record of that visit. But when I search the court system, there's no arrest record, no booking number, no case file. How is that possible? It's possible if someone deleted the records, or if someone created a parallel system, off the books, invisible to oversight. Imani looked up. Tell me exactly what happened when Miguel was arrested. Rosa took a breath. He was working at a construction site in Valdosta, new subdivision. March 1st, around 2 p.m., 3 sheriff's deputies showed up. They said there was a complaint about illegal workers. They asked for papers. Miguel showed them his work permit. He has temporary protected status, everything legal. But they said the permit looked fake. They put him in handcuffs and took him away. Did they read him his rights? I don't know. Miguel's English isn't good enough to understand what they said. And there was no interpreter. No interpreter. The words hit Imani like a punch to the gut. What happened next? I went to the jail that night. They said he was being held for questioning. The next day they said he was being transferred, but when I called the other facilities, no one had him. I went back to Lowndes County, and they said he was still there, but they wouldn't let me see him. For 3 weeks? For 3 weeks. Rosa's hands were shaking. I filed complaints. I called lawyers. I called the ACLU. Everyone says they'll look into it, but nothing happens. And then I saw your name in an article about the Mercer County case. I thought... She stopped, tears streaming down her face. I thought maybe you could help. Imani reached across the table, took Rosa's hand. I'm going to help, but I need you to understand something. What you're describing, if it's what I think it is, it's bigger than one missing man. It's a system designed to make people disappear, and taking it down is going to be dangerous. Rosa wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders. My brother is all the family I have. I don't care about danger. I care about getting him back. Ugh. The drive to Valdosta took 4 hours. Imani brought backup, 2 investigators from the Office of Judicial Integrity and a federal observer from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The Mercer County case had taught her never to walk into a corrupt system alone. Lowndes County Jail was a squat concrete building on the outskirts of town, surrounded by chain-link fence and razor wire. The parking lot was nearly empty at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. The front desk was staffed by a deputy who looked barely old enough to vote. His nameplate read, Collins. Help you? Imani produced her credentials. I'm Imani Okafor, Director of the Georgia Office of Judicial Integrity. I'm here regarding an inmate named Miguel Delgado. Deputy Collins's face went blank. Don't have anyone by that name. According to visitor logs, he's been held here since March 1st. His sister has visited him twice. Ma'am, I'm telling you, we don't have anyone by that name in our system. Then you won't mind if we take a look at your booking records. Collins shifted uncomfortably. I'd need to check with the sheriff about that. Please do. He picked up the phone, dialed, spoke in low tones that Imani couldn't quite hear. 2 minutes later, a door behind him opened. Sheriff Dale Prescott was a large man, 6'3", 250, with a belly that strained against his uniform and eyes that carried the cold calculation of a predator. He looked at Imani, then at her credentials, then at the federal observer standing behind her. Ms. Okafor. His voice was honey over broken glass. I've heard about you. The woman who brought down Judge Whitmore. Among others. Well, I'm afraid you've made a wasted trip. We don't have any inmate named Miguel Delgado. Never have. Imani pulled out a document, the commissary receipt Rosa had provided. This receipt shows a deposit made to the account of Miguel Delgado at this facility on March 10th. Your jail's address, your booking number format, your account system. Prescott examined the receipt. His expression didn't change. Must be a forgery. We deal with a lot of fraud around here. Illegals trying to scam the system. Is that what this is? A scam? That's what it looks like to me. He handed back the receipt. Now, if you don't have anything else, I've got a county to run. I have a federal subpoena. Imani produced another document. For all booking records, transfer logs, and surveillance footage from this facility for the past 60 days. Signed by a federal judge in Atlanta this morning. Prescott's smile flickered, just for a moment. I'll need to have my attorney review that. You have 24 hours to comply. After that, federal marshals will execute a search warrant. Imani stepped closer. And Sheriff Prescott? If I find out that Miguel Delgado, or anyone else, has been held illegally in this facility, I will personally ensure that you spend the rest of your career explaining yourself to federal prosecutors." She turned and walked out, her team following behind. In the parking lot, the federal observer, a man named Thomas Chen, spoke quietly. "He's hiding something." "Yes, he is." Imani looked back at the jail. Somewhere behind those concrete walls, people were being held without charges, without rights, without hope. And we're going to find out what. If you thought the corruption in Georgia was over, think again. Hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to get a lot darker. The subpoena produced results, partial results. Lowndes County's attorney delivered a flash drive containing booking records for the past 60 days. 217 inmates processed. Charges ranging from DUI to aggravated assault. Miguel Delgado's name appeared nowhere. But something else did. Look at this. Imani's lead investigator, a former FBI analyst named Patricia Vance, pointed to a column on the spreadsheet. Booking numbers. They're sequential, like they should be. But there are gaps. Imani leaned closer. What kind of gaps? Numbers that should exist but don't. LC 2024-0847 is followed by LC 2024-0851. 4 numbers missing. And here, she scrolled down. LC 2024-0863 jumps to LC 2024-0869. 6 more. Deleted records. Or parallel records. A shadow system that uses the same numbering sequence but isn't connected to the main database. Imani sat back, processing. A shadow system. Inmates who existed but didn't exist. People who could be held indefinitely without oversight, without accountability, without hope of release. How many gaps total? Patricia ran the numbers. 47, over the past 60 days alone. 47 people, vanished into a system designed to make them disappear. We need to get inside that jail. The sheriff won't allow it, not without... I don't care what the sheriff allows. Imani stood, grabbed her phone. I'm calling the U.S. attorney. We're getting a federal warrant to search every inch of that facility. And when we find those 47 people... Her voice hardened. We're going to find out exactly who put them there. The federal raid happened 3 days later. At 4 a.m. on a Friday morning, 12 FBI agents and 6 federal marshals descended on Lowndes County Jail. They came with warrants, battering rams, and the authority to search every cell, every computer, every filing cabinet in the building. Imani watched from outside the perimeter as agents streamed through the front entrance. Sheriff Prescott stood in the parking lot, hands cuffed behind his back, his face a mask of impotent rage. By 6 a.m., they had found the Shadow Wing, a section of the jail that didn't appear on any official floor plan. 12 cells, no windows, no cameras, no records. 11 of them were occupied. Miguel Delgado was in cell 7. He had lost 15 pounds. His eyes were hollow. He flinched when the agents opened his door, covering his face against the sudden light. It's okay. Imani stepped into the cell, knelt beside him. You're safe now. We're getting you out. Miguel looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. They said no one would come. They said I would never leave. They were wrong. She helped him to his feet, guided him toward the door where Rosa was waiting. Brother and sister collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing in Spanish, holding on like survivors of a shipwreck finally reaching shore. Imani watched them for a moment. Then she turned back to the Shadow Wing. 10 more cells. 10 more victims. The work wasn't finished. The investigation that followed revealed horrors beyond what Imani had imagined. The Shadow Wing had been operating for 3 years. Sheriff Prescott had used it to hold immigrants, legal and undocumented alike, for extended periods without charges. Some had been held for weeks, others for months. One man had been there for 14 months, forgotten by everyone except the guards who brought his meals. The purpose was profit. Prescott had contracted with private companies that provided labor for agricultural operations across South Georgia. The immigrants in the shadow wing were leased to these companies as workers. They were paid nothing. They were given no choice. They were slaves in all but name. The companies paid Prescott directly, cash, off the books. Over 3 years, he had accumulated nearly $2 million. The federal prosecution was swift and merciless. Prescott was charged with human trafficking, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, forced labor, and 23 counts of kidnapping. His trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 45 years in federal prison. The companies that had used slave labor were hit with civil suits that eventually totaled over $50 million in settlements. 3 executives were criminally charged. 2 fled the country. 1 was convicted and sentenced to 12 years. The 11 victims from the shadow wing, including Miguel Delgado, received compensation from the settlements. It wasn't enough to give them back the time they'd lost, but it was something. Miguel used his share to bring his mother to the United States. She arrived in Atlanta on a December morning, 2 years after her son had disappeared into a concrete cell. Imani was there when they reunited at the airport. "Thank you," Miguel said, his English much improved. "You gave me my life back." "You gave yourself your life back. You survived. You held on. All I did was open the door." He shook his head. "You did more than that. You believed me when no one else did." Imani thought about Darnell, about Marisol, about all the others whose stories had seemed impossible until someone listened. "That's what we do," she said quietly. "We believe the people no one else believes, and we fight for them until the system has no choice but to listen." The Lowndes County case led to others. A county in Alabama running a similar operation. A private prison in Mississippi, where immigrants were held indefinitely as material witnesses in cases that never went to trial. A network of labor contractors across the Southeast who had been exploiting the shadow systems for decades. Imani's office became the tip of a spear that reached across state lines, coordinating with federal agencies, civil rights organizations, and advocacy groups to dismantle systems of exploitation that had operated in plain sight for years. The work was exhausting, endless. There were days when Imani wondered if she was making any difference at all, when each case she closed seemed to reveal 2 more waiting behind it. But then she would get a call, a letter, a visit from someone whose life had been saved because someone cared enough to fight. Rosa Delgado came to see her on the anniversary of Miguel's release. "I wanted you to know," Rosa said. "Miguel is engaged. He's going to be married next spring, and he started his own construction company. Legal, licensed, everything by the book." "That's wonderful." "He wants to invite you to the wedding." Rosa smiled. "He says you're the reason he's alive to get married at all." Imani accepted the invitation. 3 years after the Mercer County reveal, Imani stood at a podium in Washington, D.C. The National Civil Rights Conference had invited her to deliver the keynote address. 2,000 attorneys, advocates, and activists filled the auditorium, waiting to hear from the woman who had exposed judicial corruption in Georgia and sparked a nationwide reckoning. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces that reflected the diversity of the country and the diversity of injustice. Every person in that room had their own story, their own battles, their own scars. "When I started this work," she began, "I thought I was fighting for one person, my cousin Darnell, a man who was convicted of a crime he didn't commit, based on a translation of words he never said." She paused, let the silence build. "But I learned something along the way, something that changed how I understand justice and injustice. I learned that Darnell's story was not unique. It was not an aberration. It was a pattern, a system, a design." She gripped the podium, looked directly into the cameras broadcasting her words across the country. The systems that destroyed my cousin's life were built by people who understood exactly what they were doing. They were built to exploit the vulnerable, to silence the powerless, to generate profit from human suffering while maintaining the appearance of justice. Her voice hardened. And those systems are still operating, right now. In courthouses and jails and detention centers across this country. They have different names, different faces, different methods, but they serve the same purpose, to maintain power by destroying the people who threaten it. She stepped away from the podium, walked to the edge of the stage. I could stand here and tell you that we're winning, that the reforms we've achieved, the legislation, the prosecutions, the policy changes, are transforming the system. And in some ways, they are. A pause. But I won't tell you that, because it would be a lie. Murmurs rippled through the audience. The truth is that every victory we achieve is met with adaptation. Every reform we implement is circumvented by those with the resources to find loopholes. Every corrupt official we remove is replaced by someone who learned from their predecessors' mistakes. She returned to the podium, leaned into the microphone. So, what do we do? How do we fight a system that evolves faster than we can reform it? She let the question hang in the air. We outlast it. The words landed like stones. We build institutions that survive beyond any single case, any single leader, any single generation. We train advocates who will continue the fight when we're gone. We create systems of accountability that don't depend on the goodwill of those in power. She looked out at the crowd, the young attorneys, the veteran activists, the students who had come to learn. And most importantly, we remember why we fight. Not for abstract principles, not for political victories, not for our own recognition. We fight for the people who have been forgotten, the people who have been silenced, the people who sit in cells right now, waiting for someone to remember that they exist. Her voice softened. Miguel Delgado spent 3 weeks in a shadow cell, waiting for someone to find him. Darnell Okafor spent 4 years in prison, waiting for someone to believe him. Marisol Vega spent months facing charges for a crime she didn't commit, waiting for someone to translate her words correctly. She straightened, squared her shoulders. They waited, and eventually someone came, but how many others are still waiting? How many people are sitting in cells tonight praying that someone will remember them? How many will die before help arrives? She stepped back from the podium. That's why we do this work. Not because we'll win every battle, not because we'll fix every system, but because somewhere, right now, someone is waiting, and they deserve to know that they haven't been forgotten. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. Imani stood at the edge of the stage, looking out at 2,000 people who had dedicated their lives to the same fight. 2,000 reasons to believe that change was possible. She thought about Darnell, running his nonprofit, helping others rebuild their lives. She thought about Ada Simmons, still maintaining her archive, still ready to testify if needed. She thought about Miguel Delgado, building a new life, preparing for a wedding, holding on to hope. And she thought about the phone on her desk back in Atlanta, the one that would ring tomorrow with another story, another person who needed help, another system that needed to be challenged. The fight never ended. But neither did she. 6 months later, Imani received a text from an unknown number. Ms. Okafor, I work at a federal detention facility in Texas. I've seen things that shouldn't be happening. Children separated from parents, medical care denied, deaths that are covered up. I don't know who else to call. She read the message twice. Texas, federal jurisdiction, outside her authority as a state official. But authority had never stopped her before. She picked up her phone, dialed a number she had saved years ago. Agent Torres, it's Imani Okafor. I need your help. The fight was just beginning.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.